Dear Mr. Professor, ladies and gentlemen, if I were to express my feelings for the honor of this well-known seat of scholarship and learning has bestowed me with, I would become rather tiresome. So permit me, therefore, to express my appreciation and gratitude with an unadorned thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, you have made rather generous references about me. I am a modest man and consider no praise of myself excessive. This evening, you might, some years ago I went to a school function on a prize-giving day in India. And very unwisely I asked the principal of the school, what would you like me to speak about? And the crushing reply was, about 5 minutes. This evening, you might brace yourselves to a longer infliction. I spent my entire life, adult life, as a diplomat and as a politician. Now, a good diplomat thinks twice before saying nothing. A good politician entertains no such illusions or such inhibitions. Today, I shall combine the virtues of both species. I am not an expert on Israel. This, on the whole, is an advantage. The amateur has a freedom which is denied to the expert. I am not even an expert on India. No one is, because every statement about India is true, so is its opposite. I stand before you not as a representative of government or any non-governmental outfit, pressure group, think tank, TV channel, newspaper, or radio network. I do not sit on any committee, and I do not allow any committee to sit on me. I am here in my personal capacity. Let me begin by, because if you want to get a feel of India, you must know something about Mahatma Gandhi. Actually, when I was planning to come here, I said to the Israeli ambassador in Delhi that I'd like to speak on Gandhi. And he wasn't particularly enthusiastic that, Gandhi had. Come on. Oh, no, you're coming here. Right up. This is the Indian ambassador to Israel. So I said, I found this very strange. Then this morning, in our discussion, I spoke at some length about Gandhi and what he meant to India and what he meant to the world, both before and after his death. And I'll begin by quoting Shimon Peres. I don't know whether what his standing with you is, but that I'm not interested in as an Indian. That's your problem. This is a book edited by a lady called Mira Averech, A-V-R-E-C-H. And she done in this book interviews with a lot of your well-known people, Shimon Peres, Uthand, Anwar and Jahan Sadat, Hosni Mubarak, Menachem Begin, Teddy Kollek, and Ben Gurion. Now she asked, there was a concert given by the Ravi Shankar, the great sitar player from India. You have another Indian here, Zubin Mehta, who conducts your Philharmonic. Peres was then Prime Minister. And at the end of the concert, he said a few words. And he said, in my eyes, in the eyes of many, India is a great continent. In the eyes of others, a fascinating place. But in the eyes of Jews, India is a great spirit. I think you put it rather nicely. India attempted to do something that no other people tried. To fight occupation by containing the inclination to violence and turn non-violence to a force not less powerful than military might. The bearer of this powerful message was Gandhi. There was no leader in history like Gandhi, Mr. Perez continues. At the beginning of his career, as a young lawyer in Durban, in South Africa, he maintained a correspondence with Tolstoy. Gandhi was then only 35 years old, and Tolstoy was nearing his death in 1910. I'm talking about 1908, 1907. Both found between them a common language from which the idea of non-violence emerged. This is not historically correct because the non-violent tradition is strong in India. We are not a non-violent state, but the ideal of non-violence, because we were a Buddhist country for 1500 years. From then on, he captured our imagination of your people. Here was a leader without an organization, without an army, without a budget, whose power was embodied in his personal example that was capable of commanding the trust of millions of his people and the spirit of many of the world's inhabitants. At one time, during the Indian freedom movement, Gandhi mobilized 40 million people to participate in our freedom struggle. And he came on the Indian scene in 1920, when India was lying prostrate under British colonial imperial rule. Gandhi said, "Get up and hold your heads high." Without email, without mobile phones, without fax machines, without Twittering, without television, without jet planes, hardly any telephones in 1920 in India, very few radios, Gandhi's message of non-violent non-cooperation reached every single corner of India. How did this happen? A, because the message was good. B, India by and large has been an oral society. So by word of mouth, it reached every one of these 700,000 villages of India, let alone the cities. Then he himself traveled by train to every part of India and was able to convert the Indian National Congress, which was founded in 1885 by an Englishman, from a middle-class, upper-class organization into a mass movement, which took on the British Empire. And the British didn't know how to deal with him because he was using the methods of non-violent non-cooperation. And forward-looking, liberal-minded Englishmen realized that what Gandhi was saying was true, that the British had no business to be there. The crucial date for you is 1917, so is it for India. You had the Balfour Declaration. We had the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. Montagu was a Jewish cabinet minister in Asquith's government and later in Lloyd George's government. And the Balfour Declaration announced that at some future date you will have a state of yours. And the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms for India said after the war, we will have a fair amount of self-government, not adult suffrage, but you will have what is called diarchy. The provinces of India will have one kind of authority, central government another, but all major decisions will be taken by the Viceroy of India and the Secretary of State in London. Well, after the war was over, and Gandhi had helped to recruit Indians for the British war effort. Millions of Indians joined the fight against Germany. After the war, when he saw that they were not fulfilling even the obligations that were due under the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, then he became a critic, and a very severe critic of British imperialism, and took the British Raj on. And he made the Raj stick in the throats of the people of the United Kingdom. Now, Mr. Perez goes on, one man against the mightiest empire in history, and this man proved to be no less powerful. The empire with hundreds of thousands of soldiers, and Gandhi in search of the great truth. This confrontation between a massive power and a great truth was very much like a biblical story. All peoples and leaders, kings, priests, generals were enthralled what was being done by Gandhi in India. The Jewish people created their own type of leaders, the prophets. The prophets of strength was not in his might, but rather in the strength of truth, which could not be defeated, blurred, or ignored. The eyes of the prophet were directed towards the future, because under no circumstances was he able to accept the present. He symbolized the notion of non-confrontation and embodied the hope for a world of greater justice. And finally, the image of Gandhi leapt before my eyes over the distance between countries and the differences between peoples, and landed in our hearts in the image of a prophet. This is said by a man who's your president at the moment, and he's hit the nail on the head. He's got the spirit of Gandhi right. Now, I don't know how much you know about Gandhi. Gandhi started his career he did his bar at law in London, 1888 to 1891. And in 1893, he went to South Africa as a lawyer. And he stayed there for 21 years. And in South Africa, when he saw that the treatment of people of Indian origin was barbaric, he decided to give up his practice, and he was earning £5,000 a year as a lawyer more than 100 years ago, and became a non-violent, non-cooperator, and took on the regime of the South African government, which at that time was the British government. He came back to India in 1914, and for 4 or 5 years, he went around India to know what India was, because he'd been away for 21 years. And you are a complex society, well, multiply that by 1,000, and that's India. We are both democracies. In some ways, we are slightly chaotic democracies. But with all the flaws, our democracies work. Now, India is a country of mind-boggling diversity. 6 religions coexist. The number of castes and subcastes runs into thousands. Our constitution, you don't have a constitution. Sometimes I think we are jolly lucky. Our constitution has already had 102 amendments in the last 62 years. Our constitution lists 18 national languages. And there are thousands of other languages and dialects. English is the link language. Custom, dress, diet, music differ from region to region. That Indian democracy works is a political miracle. There is no precedent in history for running a democracy of 1.1 billion people. We are breaking new ground, and we are making mistakes from which we are learning, as you are learning from your mistakes. But let me say, what is right with India and what is right with Israel is infinitely greater than what is wrong with Israel and what is wrong with India. And that fact, neither you nor we should forget. How has democracy taken root in India? Because what I have listed, everything is available there to disrupt a democracy, not let it take roots. And if you look at the map of the world from Mauritania to Medan, Indonesia, just count how many democracies are there who can change their governments every 5 years, and a powerful Prime Minister, Indira Gandhi, can be defeated in an election and accept it. There are not very many. You are one, we are one, there are 2 or 3 others. But in your region, which you call Middle East and we call West Asia, because you look at the world from Delhi is different, and you look at from Tel Aviv is different, and you go to London is another view you get, another dimension. In West Asia, you have a very difficult situation. And I'll come to that a little later. And as your friend and well-wisher, I'm going to be very frank. How has this survived in such a diverse country? Unity in diversity is the mantra. You know what the mantra means? Yeah. It is not a cliche. It is a reality. And without broad national approval, democracy cannot thrive or survive in any country, including yours and mine. The people of India stand by the democratic process, as do yours. With their support, we have achieved the near impossible. 3 reasons why India is a democracy and continues to be and will continue to remain a democracy. There's no going back. 1, we are good at reconciling contradictions. Because if we didn't reconcile contradictions, India won't work. 2, crisis management is India's forte. There's a crisis every week in some part of India or the other. Not in the whole of India, but in pockets. And we manage those crises in a peaceful way as far as possible. 3, centripetal forces are stronger than centrifugal forces. No part of India, and there is a state in India with a population of 200 million people, UP, Uttar Pradesh. But no part of India is greater than the whole of India. Democracy is accepted. Now, on the 15th of August, 1947, Nehru would have got up on the ramparts of the Red Fort and announced that India will be a one-party government, and nobody would have challenged him. But he said, no, India will be a secular, pluralistic democracy. One man, one vote. People said, what is all this? In 47, our education was less than 30% people who were literate. Our life expectancy was 26. And yet he said, no, we will give a vote to every Indian. And people laughed. How can this work? Well, it's worked. Because even the uneducated, illiterate Indian has the wisdom of centuries and millennia to differentiate between what is right and what's wrong for him. So for the assembly elections of the states, there are 32 states in India. He votes one way. For the national election, he votes another way. because he understands what the national issues are and what the local issues are. So Gandhi's and Nehru's faith in the Indian people was so great that they were willing to place this great responsibility of vote to every Indian over the age of 21. Now I think it's 18.
18.
Yes, it's 18 now. Simple reason was that if you could send your men as soldiers age of 18, you must give them a vote also. The Hindu population of India is 83%. Muslims, 160 million. Hindus are 840 million. Then we have Christians, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, Jews, Bhais, and they live in peace. Time to time there are Hindu-Muslim riots and fictions, but they are on a small scale. They are in pockets. That they should happen is a matter of shame to me as an Indian. They shouldn't happen. But they do. And you know the reasons why. When India became independent, you didn't have Osama bin Laden, you didn't have Taliban, you didn't have, what do you call them? Hamas, is it? Yeah. There was no Muslim fundamentalism. Africa had 54 countries and 4 were independent. Egypt, partially independent. Liberia, colony of America but independent. South Africa, racist, and Ethiopia. The population of Muslims in India at the time of partition of India in 47, and you are also a country which has been partitioned, and so have we. I belong to a school which thinks the partition of India was a lesser evil. Because in today's date, incidentally, I hope it's off the record what I'm saying.
Yes.
There's no press here. Yeah. If India had remained united, today the population of Muslims in India would have been 450 million out of 1.1 billion. And they would have made life difficult. Why? Because we would have had to face terrorism, which you also face and we face. You would have had the Taliban. You would have a Muslim fundamentalists. You would have the Arab countries funding these terrorists. And you would have a communal right, that means religious rights between Hindu and Muslim all the time. So when India was partitioned, our population was 400 million. 330 million remained in India, 55 went to Pakistan. Gandhi was opposed to the partition of India, because all his life he had worked for a united India. So on the day of independence, 15th August 47, Gandhi was not in New Delhi to celebrate. He was far away in eastern India, patching up the quarrel between the Hindus and Muslims. And he said, for me, this is not a day of joy, it's a day of sorrow because my country has been divided. But the younger leadership of the Congress party said that no, we'll accept what the British are offering. And the partition of India was decided by a handful of people. And a viceroy called Lord Louis Mountbatten, who divided the country within 3 months of his arrival in India in March 1947, without realizing what the consequences would be. Tens of millions of people went from one side to another one. Over 2 million people were killed. Still, we were able to maintain our democracy, settle down. With horrendous problems, India couldn't even produce a fountain pen after 150 years of British rule. Our food production was 55 million tons. As I told you, our education literacy was very, very low. Life expectancy was in the 20s. So we worked very hard, as you worked very hard for after getting your state in 1947. We became independent 15th August. Your thing was announced in the UN in 1947 December. But let me tell you, India voted against the creation of the state of Israel. When did the Jews first come to India? Can any of you answer? Make an effort.
After the destruction of the first temple, some say?
No. The Indian Nobel laureate, Amartya Sen, has written, the Jews came to India, it appears, shortly after the fall of Jerusalem, though there are other theories as well, including the theory that members of the Bene Israeli community arrived in India in the 8th century before the Christian era.
That's what he said. That's what he said.
Okay? This is not a fairy tale. This is a fact. There is another plausible theory that they came in 175 BCE, before Christian era. And then he continues, Jewish arrivals continued in later waves in the 5th or 6th centuries from southern Arabia and Persia until the last wave of Baghdadi Jews from Iraq and Syria, unquote. From this is clear that the ancient Hindus and the Jews had contacts several millennia ago. And I just want to tell you that our religions are different. Hinduism is not a religion, it's a way of life. The religious practices of the Hindus and the religious practices of the Jews have remained unaltered for 5,000 years. The Brahmins of India do the rituals as their ancestors 5,000 years ago, exactly as they do today. So do your people. Now, Jawaharlal Nehru was the first Prime Minister of India. And he was Prime Minister for 17 years, from 1947 to 1964. And he spent 10 years in British jails. He came from a very rich family. He went to Harrow. He went to Cambridge. He did his bar in London. And he spent 10 years in British jails. He could easily have taken an easier life. He didn't have to. So in jail, he wrote a book called The Glimpses of World History. While he was a guest of His Britannic Majesty in the jails of India. Now, he wrote the book in 1930-34. It's a 1,000-page book. He was sympathetic to the Jews. And he wrote, I quote, the Jews were and are a peculiar and strangely persevering people. After a brief period of glory in the days of David and Solomon, they fell on evil days. Even this glory was on a small scale, but it was magnified in their imagination till it became a kind of golden age of the past, which would come again at the appointed time when the Jews would become great and powerful again. It is one of the wonders of history, Nehru writes, how the Jews, without a home or a refuge, harassed and persecuted beyond measure, or often done to death, have preserved their identity and held together for 2,000 years. Nehru did not stop there. He recorded that some of the most beautiful and moving poems in English are the songs and laments of the Jews as given in the authorized translation of the Bible. In Hebrew, they are even more moving. One example which Nehru quotes. Here is one with matchless poignancy. By the waters of Babylon, we sat down and wept. We remembered thee, O Zion. As for our harps, we hang them up upon the trees that are therein. For they led us away captive, required us, when a song and melody in our heaviness, sing us one of the songs, O Zion. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. If I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the root in my mouth, yea, if I prefer not Jerusalem in my mirth. The ancient Hindus invented the zero and the numericals 1 to 9 and 0. Then they went to Greece and the Arabs spread them. You invented a new idea of time, which was adopted by the Hindus, who think in terms of eternity. And as Professor Theodor Zeldin of Exeter University has written, 300 million years, thus sparing themselves the immediate anxiety. Zeldin also says that your people gave the world the word sabbatical, a great boon for contemplation, reflection, and relaxation. And thank you very much. Let us now take a quantum jump and come to the year 1917. And I have briefly spoken to you about it. When the resolution was placed before the United Nations in 1947, there was a committee appointed by the United Nations. India was a member of that committee. It was considered of 10 countries. And India, Iran, and Yugoslavia gave a minority report opposing the creation of the State of Israel. And when the state was created, India didn't recognize immediately. We recognized you on the 17th of September 1950. Now, why did this happen? India and Pakistan had been created. We were having serious problems with Pakistan because Pakistan was an Islamic state and India was a secular state. Then we had contacts with various countries in the Arab world going back to the 1st century AD. Dhows and boats came from the Arabian Peninsula and Yemen to southern India. Christianity came in 52 AD, St. Thomas came. So the links in the pre-Islamic era between Indians and the Arab world were established. Same with Iran, with Iran. And the Indian trade went up to Venice because, they took the Silk Route and all the wonderful things of India went there. And if you read even Shakespeare, the Indian wealth is provided. We were named the golden bird, which constantly fell prey to foreign invasions. A fact of history of which I am not proud at all, because we let ourselves down. But the context at individual level continued. And now, for example, take me. I am now in my 8th decade of my life. I saw Jerusalem yesterday, and I can now say that, I can go to my funeral pyre after having seen Jerusalem. This is the kind of impact Jerusalem made on me yesterday. What did I say?
So the committee.
Yeah. In spite of the fact that we didn't recognize the state of Israel till 1950, but you opened an office in Bombay. Israel wanted reciprocity. At that stage, 3 years after independence, we couldn't because of the large numbers of Muslims in India, our contacts with the Arab nations going back 1,000 years, much before Islam. And therefore we had to tread very, very carefully. But Nehru was in touch with the leadership of Israel. He met a number of your important people in London as Prime Minister. He had a correspondence with Moshe Sharat, and I don't want to quote the letter, but it's a beautiful letter that Nehru wrote to Sharat, and saying why we couldn't recognize, we will in the future do so. And he also wrote to Krishna Menon, his foreign policy advisor, as why India at that moment couldn't. Now he had a number of important Jewish friends in America and England. And one of them was Jane Gunther. Her husband was John Gunther, one of the great journalists of the first half of the 20th century. There are 4 or 5 of them. There was Vincent Sheen, Jewish, Gunther, Jewish. Sheen wrote a book on Gandhi called Lead, Kindly Light. And Jane Gunther wrote to him about Israel, and he wrote her, he was Prime Minister of India, writing to just a friend, a 2-page letter explaining the reasons for it and appreciating that she was concerned about it. Similarly, he had another Jewish friend, Dorothy Norman. She worked for Indian independence a great deal. I also knew her when I was in America. She was the most remarkable person. She visited India many times. She stayed with Nehru. And she worked for the India League in the United States, because the United States, and Roosevelt in particular, spoke up for India to Churchill, that you must do something about India's independence after the war is over. And Churchill was adamant. Now, he was a Zionist, he was very pro your country, he was anti-Nazi as Nehru was. Even before Churchill was anti-Nazi, Nehru was. Nehru refused to meet Mussolini in 1936 when he was coming back from Europe after the death of his wife. And Mussolini sent a chief of protocol to Rome airport, and Nehru said, no, I'm not going to see him. On India, Churchill's record is deplorable. As late as 1942, he told Roosevelt that I have not become the king's first minister to preside over the liquidation of the British Empire. But this is precisely what he did. 5 years later, India was independent. And when India became independent, the liquidation of the British Empire was a matter of years, not decades. It was all over. And when we became independent, he opposed the India Independence Bill in the House of Commons. And he said, India is not a country, the equator is not a country, and neither is India a country like the equator. And you know, he's a very great man, but occasionally he talked a lot of bilge. He actually said that we are handing over India to men of straw, who will be blown away within a few months of our departure. Well, the British Empire was blown away, not India. We are very much there. I am a great admirer of Churchill in many other ways. But what he said about Gandhi is inexcusable. It didn't do Gandhi any harm, but it didn't do Churchill any good either. Because he appeared as a small man. When you are dealing big issues, India is not a piddling little country somewhere in the South Pacific. I mean, when his ancestors were climbing trees, we were producing some of the greatest literature of the world. Now, I'll give you some personal experience of mine. I was at the Permanent Mission of India at the United Nations, where I heard and saw Golda Meir, India here, then next to us, Indonesia, Iran, Iraq, Israel. There's nothing you could do about the seating arrangement. The Iraqis had to sit with Golda Meir, or whether it was Abba Iban, for whom I have very great respect, because I've never heard anybody speak English so well, and his eloquence is absolutely amazing. He was the only person who was able to talk straight to his face to General de Gaulle. And I don't know whether you read the record of the meeting. It's extraordinary. How he handled himself in the presence of a man like de Gaulle, who was no pushover. I realized that our continued policy of not having diplomatic relations wasn't doing us any good. You see, on all crucial issues, for example, take Kashmir, not a single Muslim state supported us. Doesn't support us till today. Only Baghdad. One. We had 3 wars with Pakistan. We were a non-aligned country. The Arabs, many of them non-aligned. Not once did they speak in favor. When Bangladesh was created, now people say, we broke up Pakistan. No, we didn't. The Muslims of East Pakistan broke up Pakistan because they didn't want to live under the high-handedness of the Muslims of West Pakistan. The Muslims of West Pakistan spoke Urdu. These people spoke Bengali. And the national anthem of Bangladesh is written by Rabindranath Tagore. Because Indian Bengal and Bangladesh speak the same language. When we were invaded by China in 1962, no Muslim state spoke in favor of us. Then in the Organization of Islamic Countries, OIC, repeatedly anti-India resolutions were tabled at the conference and passed against India. So from 1966 to 71, I was working in Mrs. Indira Gandhi's office as Prime Minister. So in 1967, I wrote a long note, that Indian bureaucracy calls it, sort of a paper, in which I argued as to why we should not have ambassadorial relations between Israel and India. Now she read it and she said, you got a point, but the time is not yet. Because there was strong opposition within the Congress party, where there were very important national level leaders in the Congress party. So that's why it was delayed as it was. And in the conflicts that you had with the Arabs, our sympathies were with the Palestinians and the Arabs. So there was, when the younger people came and when Rajiv Gandhi became Prime Minister, in Indira Gandhi's time, much didn't happen. But and I was then Minister of State in Rajiv Gandhi's government. I did 31 years as a diplomat and then 25 years as a politician. So I knew that, he had an open mind on this. And he was quite a remarkable young man. He was Prime Minister at the age of 40. In a country where age matters a great deal, the older you are, the wiser you are supposed to be. I don't know how that link is. I know a lot of very old people who are absolute fools. But India, respect for age is something which there's nothing you can do about. So on my table landed a piece of paper saying that India has won entered the finals of the Davis Cup tennis competition in our group. And Israel was the other finalist. And the finals were to be played in Tel Aviv. Earlier we had got to the finals against South Africa 4 years before. And India didn't go. We boycotted the final, although we would have won the thing. So I said we should, I was asked my opinion, and the opinion in the Foreign Office was divided. But I had a fair amount of clout, and the Prime Minister agreed. So we came here to play a tennis match with your people in Tel Aviv. I like to think that we defeated you, but I'm not sure. Yeah. Now, this was a beginning. It was symbolic. It's like ping-pong diplomacy China and America had. It was tennis diplomacy, which broke the ice. And in 1992, now we had Mr. Narasimha Rao as the Prime Minister of India. Now, he's not well known outside the country. He was Prime Minister for 5 years. He'd been Chief Minister of a very large state in southern India. He'd been Foreign Minister for 5 years. And then India announced in January 1992 that we will upgrade our relations to ambassadorial level. The man who broke the barrier was P.V. Narasimha Rao. He was an astute politician who never lost his cool, who spoke softly in measured words and phrases. He used one word where two would do. He did not encourage intimacy. He was not a warm personality. He was an unpretentious scholar of low voltage who spoke several languages fluently. Hasty decision-making was not his style. It was only after agonizing and mature consideration he arrived at this decision. I knew him well. For quite some time, he was my boss. When I entered politics, we had serious differences. But I was no match for the learned Brahmin. But neither was I a pushover. But I learned a great deal from him. What is the difference between foreign policy and diplomacy? Foreign policy is what you do. Diplomacy is how you do it. This I learned from Narasimha Rao, who was not a diplomat till he became foreign minister. He was a grassroots level politician. Before altering India's Israeli policy, Mr. Rao carefully considered the minuses and pluses. What would be the reaction of Indian Muslims? Electorally, they mattered. 150 million people with votes. He tested the waters and concluded that the fallout could be and was manageable. How would the Muslim countries all over the world react? And Pakistan's fulminations had to be countered with politeness because they made a lot of noise when we raised our things. We had to keep in mind, particularly the view of the Palestinians, for whose legitimate rights we have always raised our voice, and the Arab countries. Now, Rao was an instinctive politician. And because he was a Brahmin, the cerebral level was very high, almost as high as your people. Now, he had all the intelligence agencies at his command, so they gave him all the feedback. And he declared that the risk was worth taking. Not a single country broke diplomatic relations with India, not one Muslim country. They accepted because the world had changed. This doesn't mean that we have given up supporting the legitimate rights of the people of Palestine, but not at your cost. And I'll come a little later. What is the answer to your problem? I am not in a position to preach or teach. Now, you've fought a number of wars. We have fought a number of wars with Pakistan. And on a much larger scale than our wars are. As foreign minister, I negotiated with them. As ambassador to Pakistan, even at the most critical times, we had, one-to-one very good relationships with the Pakistanis. And there were a large number of liberal Pakistanis who wanted close relations with India. But the Pakistani armed forces total against it, as they are today. And the army has been... Why has democracy not taken root in Pakistan? It hasn't taken root in any Muslim country with the exception of Malaysia and now Indonesia. It has taken root in ours and yours and other countries. So we have been continuously talking with the Pakistanis after every war, as a matter of fact, after 1972, in 72, after the Bangladesh war, when Pakistan was divided, Mr. Bhutto, the Prime Minister, came to have talks with Mrs. Gandhi. And she returned to Pakistan 5,600 square miles of territory which we had conquered. Because she took a long-term view of, now you can't afford 5,600 miles. We can. We had taken 90,000 prisoners. They were all returned. There was strong criticism in the Indian Parliament. But Indira Gandhi said, I have to look ahead 25, 50, 100 years. Geography can't be changed frequently. It has been changed once, Bangladesh, been changed here. But we can't wish away. So she took a long-term view. And we signed a similar agreement in which paragraph 6 included the two sides will talk to find a peaceful solution to the Kashmir question. So we are still talking. Now we have tried 3 wars. It hasn't helped. Now we are suffering from terrorism as you are. The attack on Mumbai in 26/11/2008, as much an attack on Israel as in India. They targeted the Jewish house in Bombay and the little boy whose parents had been shot. It touched the heart of every Indian when the Indian ayah took him in his lap. I can never forget this. Everybody saw it. So, even now, we know that they are sending terrorists to parts of India. We have said we are open for a dialogue with you, including Kashmir, because there is no other way. Now, India can live with the tension, but tension and damage control can never be a substitute for policy. And this is where I want to beg you, that you cannot be in a state of perpetual preparedness for war. It's not feasible in the long run, because it cannot be a substitute for a policy. Damage control is not a policy. Damage control is an event at a particular time. You can't have a policy of damage control for the next 25 years. We realize this. So that's why we are constantly talking to them. And I don't see a substitute. And I'm saying this to you frankly as a great admirer of you, your country and your people and you. I've read a great deal about Israel. I am seeing Amos Oz tomorrow. Some of you may not like him. I happen to agree with what he wrote in the Herald Tribune and in your paper. What's it called? Haaretz, yeah. I happen to agree with him, what he said. Because there's... How long will you go on fighting it? And as I was telling our friend, there was a time when you were invincible, but you are not. There was a time you had embassies in large number of countries in Africa. You don't. One of the principal lessons of diplomacy is to increase the number of your friends and reduce the number of your adversaries. Now I know your position is unique. Your suffering has been unique for 2,000 years. That you have come out of it and made this country such a wonderful country, a developed country in no time. I mean, I thought Jerusalem would be a dusty town with nothing in it. And here I was, in Elysium. So everybody admires you in India. You're admired all over the place. But as your friend, well-wisher, please don't rule out dialogue. Now I know this is not a popular thing to say, and I won't say it in public. I'm telling you, because I imagine you're all highly intelligent people, well-informed about what's happening in this part of the world and other parts of the world. But there is no substitute. Eventually, you have Iran next door, your biggest problem. Now people ask me, what are relations with Iran? We have historical links with Iran. Many Iranians over the centuries settled down in India. Our language is affected by Persian. Our dress, cuisine. A lot of Indians went to Iran to teach them various things, various crafts. Our energy problem is acute. We import 70% of our oil from the Gulf and most of it from Iran. We can't send any goods to Afghanistan because Pakistan won't allow. So we have to go via Iran. If Pakistan were to have good relations with us and we want good relations with them, then we could go straight from there. Tashkent is by route about 10 hours drive. Now we have to go via Iran to have contact with the Central Asian republics of the former Soviet Union. Then we have 3.2 million Indians working in the Arab world who have got very good jobs, who pay no income tax and remit to India in foreign exchange billions of dollars. I'm not saying that we approve of everything that Mr. Ahmadinejad has done, but the fact that China and Russia voted for the resolution in the Security Council, to me it means nothing. Mr. Ahmadinejad is in Peking within 3 days of the resolution being passed. And he is going to go to Moscow with to meet Mr. Putin. That's politics. Sanctions have never worked. They didn't work in South Africa. They didn't work in southern Rhodesia. I was closely connected with them. Sanctions were 11 years in southern Rhodesia, which today is Zimbabwe. Mr. Ian Smith was the leader of the whites. The GDP of southern Rhodesia increased during sanctions because a lot of chaps, including the Brits and the Americans, were sending things to him, having voted for sanctions in the United Nations. Same thing happened in South Africa. Why did the apartheid regimes didn't collapse? Till the universities in California said the pension funds will not go to South Africa investment. In the resolutions in the United Nations of South Africa, till 1987, America, Britain, France were voting against Mandela. They were calling Mandela a terrorist. Till 88, when he's released, oh, he's embraced, taken to Buckingham Palace. Whom are you trying to kid? We know because our people suffered in South Africa. Till Gandhi said, go on, get up. And Mandela began as a Gandhian, but he realized it was impossible with the apartheid government to be non-violent. So he took to violent struggle, but he still holds Gandhi as an ideal. Let me conclude, because I have a huge speech. You must realize that in life, there are no level playing fields. The meek will never inherit the earth, and neither will the chosen. It's a cruel world. It's a difficult world. Now, but there are islands of hope and light, and you can be one. Because your contribution to the welfare of humanity is unparalleled. Just look at the list of Nobel Prize winners from Israel and the Jewish community. We have only 4 Nobel Prize winners. You go into dozens and dozens in every area. You help us in our agriculture. We have very good trade with you. It was 4 million, today is what, 200 million?
Yes.
Yeah, it's 200 million. And not only diamonds, in many other areas. And the cooperation in intelligence exchanges, it's constant and at the highest levels. We have a lot to learn from you. We are also a country which is doing very well economically. India's growth is now 8%. China's growth is going to come down. In the recession, India didn't suffer at all because we have a Prime Minister who's an outstanding economist. And the Indian banks are very tough. They don't dish out loans like the American banks do to buy property and then fall flat. We didn't suffer. India is going to be a young country in the next 40 years. China is going to be an old country in the next 40 years. We are a democracy. Now, we have to see. I began my diplomatic career in China 55 years ago. And I saw the first generation of leaders, Mao Zedong, Zhou Enlai and others, from close quarters. One country, 2 systems. Let's see if after the present leadership, this is the 4th generation, 5th, 6th, how it goes. Now the Chinese are very realistic, practical people. As I was telling Dan, at the United Nations, in the committee I was, decolonization, we had a list of all the colonies, British colonies, French, Spanish, Dutch, Portuguese, and we included Hong Kong. The Chinese delegation said, no, Hong Kong is not a colony. Hong Kong is a part of China. We have leased it out to the British. So it was not included in the list of colonies. Mao Zedong could have walked into Hong Kong and taken it over in 5 minutes. They didn't, because they think in terms of centuries. We think in terms of 5-year plans. We are not learning to think in terms of 50 years or 60 years. But what I'm saying is that India is not aspiring to be a world power. India is aspiring to be a country which can offer some ideas to the world for peace and goodwill and for tranquility and brotherly relationships. And so we have to aim not only at peace that passeth all understanding, but the peace that passeth all misunderstanding. Thank you.